They say the internet never forgets. But what if I told you there's a moment, caught on camera, where someone walks into a place, and then they don't come out. Ever. No trace. No sighting. No exit. Just one blink. And gone. Welcome back to Black Thread Mysteries, the channel where we dig up stories that seem too bizarre to be true. And yet, they are. Today, we're diving into one of the strangest disappearances of the 21st century. A case so eerie, so unsolvable, that it feels more like a glitch in the simulation than something from the real world. It was supposed to be an ordinary night. March 31st, 2006. A Friday evening in Columbus, Ohio. Brian Shaffer, a second-year med student at Ohio State University, was heading out for drinks. He had a lot on his plate. Upcoming exams, the grief of recently losing his mother, and a long-awaited vacation with his girlfriend Alexis just around the corner. He needed a break, a night out with friends. Brian met up with his friend Clint Florence, and together they went bar hopping in the city's Arena District. They had drinks, shared stories, and ended up at a bar with a strange name, the Ugly Tuna Saloona. Security cameras caught Brian and his friends riding the escalator up to the entrance. That was around 1:15 a.m. That would be the last time Brian Shaffer was ever seen. Dozens of people entered and exited that bar in the hours that followed. Cameras caught all of them. But Brian? He never came out. Not through the front, not through the back, not through a side door. It's as if the bar swallowed him whole. Brian was no runaway. He was smart, ambitious, and deeply loved by his family and girlfriend. He had no reason to vanish. Yet, he did. And the strangest part? No one saw him leave. There was no scuffle, no sign of distress. Just. To understand how chilling Brian Shaffer's disappearance truly is, you first have to understand the man himself. He wasn't some troubled loner or fringe personality. He was bright, focused, and well-loved, the kind of person people don't just forget. And yet, somehow, the world did. Brian was born on February 25, 1979, in Pickerington, Ohio. He grew up in a loving home with his father, Randy, his mother, Renee, and his younger brother, Derek. Those who knew him described him as thoughtful, funny, and effortlessly charismatic. He had a dry wit, the kind that could catch people off guard and leave them laughing. But he wasn't just fun. He was driven. After finishing his undergraduate degree at Ohio State, Brian enrolled in OSU's College of Medicine, working toward becoming a doctor. But behind the ambition, there was also an artist. He loved music, especially Pearl Jam. He even dreamed of starting a band one day, believing music spoke to people in ways medicine couldn't. But life threw Brian a devastating blow in March 2006. His mother, Renee, passed away after a long battle with cancer. She and Brian had been incredibly close. Her loss hit him hard. Friends and family noticed that he didn't seem quite the same afterward. He still smiled. He still joked. But something was different behind the eyes. Still, he didn't retreat. He kept attending school. He kept seeing his girlfriend, Alexis Wagoner, whom he had been dating for over a year. They were planning a spring break trip to Miami, a chance to recharge and reconnect. Alexis later said she believed Brian was going to propose during that trip. Despite his recent grief, Brian had a full life. He was doing well in school, had a strong relationship, and had people who cared deeply for him. But not everything was perfect. Some classmates recalled that Brian sometimes talked about how hard medical school was, not just academically, but emotionally. He was tired. He mentioned once or twice that he needed a break. Nothing extreme. Just the kind of burnout you expect from someone juggling loss, pressure, and life's expectations. His father, Randy, noticed it too. He said Brian seemed distracted, maybe a bit more withdrawn, but not dangerously so. There were no signs of self-harm, no alarming behavior. If anything, Brian seemed like someone carrying a heavy burden, but determined to keep moving. And then there's Clint, Brian's friend from undergrad, and the one he went out with the night he vanished. Clint, on Friday, March 31st, 2006, Brian Shaffer was just days away from flying to Miami with his girlfriend, Alexis. But that night, he had a different plan: to go out for drinks with his friend Clint Florence and unwind after a long week of med school exams. What began as a typical Friday night ended with one of the most baffling missing persons cases in modern history. Brian started the evening having dinner with his father, Randy. According to Randy, Brian seemed tired but was in good spirits. He didn't mention anything unusual. Later that evening, around 9 p.m., Brian met up with Clint. They began a bar crawl near the Ohio State University campus, specifically in the University District of Columbus, Ohio. The two friends had a few drinks at a place called the Ugly Tuna Saloona, a bar located on the second floor of the South Campus Gateway complex, a bustling area filled with nightlife. After their first round at the Ugly Tuna, Brian and Clint continued the night, bar hopping down High Street. They met up with another friend, Meredith Reed, who offered them a ride back to the Ugly Tuna for one last round before calling it a night. They returned to the bar around 1:15 a.m. At this point, everything seemed normal. There was no sign that anything unusual was about to happen. Surveillance footage from the Ugly Tuna's only visible camera shows Brian walking into the bar around 1:15 a.m. with Clint and Meredith. A little later, the footage shows Brian stepping outside the bar around 1:55 a.m., seemingly talking on the phone. Then, he's gone. What makes this moment so mysterious is that surveillance cameras never captured Brian leaving the building again. Not the front, not the emergency exits. Nowhere. It was as if he walked into a space with only one door and simply ceased to exist. At 2 a.m., the bar closed, and people began filing out. Clint and Meredith looked for Brian, assuming he had wandered off or gone to the restroom. After waiting and not seeing him, they finally left, assuming he had gone home without saying goodbye. But Brian never made it home. He never contacted anyone again. And by the time Alexis called him the next morning, his phone rang but went unanswered. It would continue to do that for days. When Brian didn't show up at the airport on Monday for their flight to Miami, Alexis panicked. She immediately called his father, and the two of them contacted the police. What started as concern quickly escalated into a full investigation. The first step: reviewing the security footage at Ugly Tuna. And that's where things got weird. As police examined the footage, they clearly saw Brian entering the bar. Once Brian Shaffer was officially declared missing, the Columbus Police Department launched a search effort that would soon spiral into one of the most baffling and fruitless investigations in Ohio's history. Initially, authorities believed they were dealing with a fairly standard missing adult case. Perhaps he had walked off, perhaps he'd had too much to drink and ended up in some kind of trouble. But as the hours ticked by and the leads ran dry, it became clear: Brian's disappearance wasn't going to be that simple. The first step was canvassing the Ugly Tuna Saloona itself. Police went through the premises thoroughly, checking bathrooms, stairwells, and even storage areas. They also examined the construction site behind the bar, the only area Brian could have exited without being seen by the main camera. That site, however, was dangerous and filled with obstacles: gravel, steel beams, and locked gates. Officers brought in cadaver dogs to sweep the area. Nothing turned up. No scent trail, no signs of injury, no evidence that Brian had even set foot back there. As the search expanded beyond the bar, police interviewed dozens of people. They spoke with friends, classmates, co-workers, and especially Clint Florence and Meredith Reed, the last two people to see Brian alive. According to Clint, he and Brian had gotten separated inside the bar near closing time, and after failing to find him, Clint had simply assumed Brian left early or found another way home. Clint never called to check on Brian after that night. He didn't appear overly concerned in the days that followed, and when police asked him to take a polygraph test, he refused, on the advice of a lawyer. That refusal has raised suspicions for years. Though police never declared Clint a suspect, the fact that he was one of the last to see Brian and later distanced himself from the investigation has cast a long shadow. On the other hand, Meredith Reed, who had driven the two friends back to the bar that night, cooperated fully and passed a polygraph. Authorities then pulled in help from state and even federal agencies. They examined Brian's bank accounts. No activity. His phone, silent. His passport, untouched. There was no evidence of voluntary disappearance. His apartment showed no signs of packing or planning. His car was still parked outside, and there were no purchases that indicated he was preparing to leave town. What made things worse was the lack of motive. Brian wasn't facing financial trouble. He had a girlfriend he deeply cared for, and he was days away from a spring break trip with her to Miami. His medical school record was clean, his future looked promising, and despite still grieving the loss of his mother Renee, there were no clear signs that he was suicidal or planning to abandon his life. As the days turned into weeks, Brian's family took matters as the official investigation ran cold. It was Brian's father, Randy Shaffer, who emerged as the most tireless force behind the continued search. Randy, a man worn by grief after recently losing his wife, refused to believe that his son had simply vanished into thin air. For him, giving up was never an option. While the rest of the world began to move on, Randy remained grounded in Columbus, desperately searching for answers where no one else seemed to look. He spent countless hours following up on tips, printing and handing out missing person flyers, walking through neighborhoods and abandoned areas, even venturing into homeless shelters to look for someone who might have seen Brian. He constantly reached out to the police, demanding updates, urging them to keep the case alive. Despite the dwindling attention, Randy never stopped trying. The Shaffer family had created a website where people could submit tips, and Randy personally reviewed each message. He believed someone knew something, maybe a bartender, a bystander, or even a stranger walking past the Ugly Tuna Saloon that night. For Randy, hope and heartbreak lived side by side. He didn't know if his son was alive, but he needed to believe there was still a chance, no matter how slim. The public, too, remained engaged. Several online communities, particularly forums like Web Sleuths and Reddit, began to obsess over the mystery. Theories multiplied. Had Brian been abducted? Did he suffer a medical emergency and end up somewhere no one thought to look? Or had something darker happened inside the bar itself? Something covered up by those who knew more than they were letting on. And then came a twist that no one saw coming, and one that would make Brian's disappearance even more tragic. In September 2008, 2 years after Brian vanished, Randy Shaffer was killed in a freak accident while clearing debris from his yard during a storm. A tree branch snapped and struck him fatally. The man who had spent the last 2 years of his life searching endlessly for his son was gone. At Randy's funeral, mourners gathered to honor not only his life, but also the unimaginable loss he had endured. And it was here that something deeply disturbing happened. An online condolence page was created so friends and loved ones could leave messages. But among the tributes, one post stood out. A message that said simply, "To Dad, love Brian, U.S. Virgin Islands." The message sparked immediate speculation. Could Brian have faked his own disappearance and sent this cryptic note to his father? Was it an inside joke between them? Or someone playing a cruel trick? Investigators tracked the IP address and determined the message had been posted from a public computer, most likely a hoax. But even a small chance it could have been real reignited hope and debate in the online community. If you're still here with us, thank you. You're clearly as intrigued and haunted by this case as we are. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is right now. It's amazing how this story continues to pull people in, even years later. Because the mystery of Brian Shaffer isn't just about a man disappearing. It's about how, even in an age of cameras, smartphones, and constant surveillance, someone can simply slip through the cracks. In 2020, more than a decade after Brian's disappearance, the case made headlines once again, but not for the reasons you might expect. The FBI officially got involved, bringing new tools and technology to re-examine the evidence. With advancements in facial recognition, digital forensics, and geographic profiling, many hoped there would be fresh momentum. Was there a chance Brian had been living under the radar all this time? In fact, one alleged photo began circulating online, supposedly showing Brian alive in Mexico, sitting outside a restaurant. The image sparked a wave of speculation. The man bore a striking resemblance to Brian, and the photo seemed recent. But after FBI analysis and comparison with known features, the image was ruled out. Once again, hopes were raised, only to fall back into the pit of speculation. Theories continued to evolve, and with social media playing a huge role in modern investigations, the case gained a new wave of digital detectives. Reddit, Twitter, and YouTube channels began analyzing everything: the timeline, security footage, eyewitness statements. Some even recreated 3D models of the ugly tuna saloon to see if a hidden exit or a camera blind spot could explain how Brian vanished. A few claimed he might have exited through a back service door, but even that route had security surveillance, and no footage ever showed him leaving. Others began speculating about his friend and DS, especially Clint Florence, the one who refused to take a lie detector test. Could Clint have been protecting someone? Or was he simply unwilling to cooperate due to trauma, guilt, or legal concerns? With every theory came a dozen more questions. If Clint knew something, why wouldn't he speak up, even anonymously? One darker theory suggested that Brian may have fallen victim to foul play inside the bar itself. Could he have been injured in an altercation, and his body disposed of in a way that avoided detection? Perhaps someone powerful had a reason to cover it up. It sounded like a crime drama. But sometimes the most unbelievable explanations hold pieces of truth. And then there's the theory that continues to unsettle many. Brian left of his own free will. There were those who believed that the death of his mother had triggered a deep depression, something he may not have shown outwardly. His plans to become a doctor, his long-term relationship, the pressure of his father's expectations. As we peel back more layers of Brian Shaffer's disappearance, a darker and more disturbing theory emerges: the idea of a cover-up, not by strangers, but potentially by those closest to him. It's the kind of suspicion that feels uncomfortable, even offensive to some, but it refuses to fade. When someone vanishes without a trace, and those around them remain silent, the silence itself becomes a suspect. Let's start with Clint Florence, the friend who was with Brian on the night he vanished. Clint was the last person confirmed to have spoken to Brian inside the bar. He was also the one who, when police asked him to take a polygraph, refused. That alone sparked years of suspicion. While lie detectors aren't foolproof, most people in such situations willingly comply to clear their name. Clint's refusal wasn't illegal, but it was deeply unusual. Even Brian's own father, Randy Shaffer, publicly urged Clint to speak up. Randy believed Clint might be withholding information, not necessarily because he was guilty, but because he might be protecting someone else. A friend? A staff member? Himself? After Randy's passing, some hoped Clint might finally come forward, but he never did. Now consider this. If Brian had been harmed inside the bar, intentionally or accidentally, and someone panicked, it's possible the scene was cleaned up and covered before the night ended. The ugly tuna saloon had areas not fully covered by cameras. The back service door, though monitored, could have blind spots. Could someone have exited with Brian's body in a trash container? Could the cleanup have been aided by bar staff or security, either knowingly or unknowingly? It sounds far-fetched, until you remember that stranger things have happened in true crime history. Entire bodies have disappeared from urban areas before. Evidence has been destroyed. Stories have been manipulated. In moments of panic, people do unthinkable things to protect themselves or their livelihoods. And then there's Brian's relationship with Alexis, his girlfriend. She was planning a vacation with him, and she seemed utterly blindsided by his disappearance. For years after, she kept calling his phone, hoping perhaps that one day he'd answer. In 2006, something strange happened. The phone rang. It didn't go straight to voicemail. Sprint later claimed it was a glitch, a ping from a tower in Hilliard, Ohio. But it reignited hope. If it wasn't a glitch, was it Brian? Or was it someone else who had the phone? Brian's private life also held secrets we might never fully uncover. Though he was seen as fun-loving and intelligent, he had just suffered a major personal loss, the death of his mother. Grief has a way of warping even the most stable minds. Was Brian grappling with internal turmoil deeper than his friends realized? Could he have stayed? In the absence of answers, the internet fills the void. Over the years, Brian Shaffer's case has become one of the most heavily discussed missing persons cases online. Not just because of how he vanished, but because of how deeply unsettling it is to think that someone could be erased in a place surrounded by technology. From Reddit to YouTube to web sleuth forums, digital detectives have been combing through every piece of available footage, every interview, and every line of the police report, like it's a sacred text hiding a single, missed clue. One of the first theories that gained traction online was the hidden exit hypothesis. People theorized that there may have been an unknown or undocumented way out of the ugly tuna saloon. Perhaps a hatch, a duct, or a stairwell that wasn't covered by cameras. A few even speculated about access to maintenance tunnels beneath the building, connecting to underground utility paths used by workers. But when city planners were asked, no such secret passages were confirmed. Then came the wave of AI-powered video enhancements. Amateur sleuths took the grainy security footage and ran it through software to sharpen details. They slowed down Brian's last known moments, frame by frame, and cross-referenced clothing, posture, and body language with every person exiting the bar. Still, no definitive proof surfaced that he left. Some Reddit users became obsessed with analyzing facial expressions and behavior of others seen in the footage. One user pointed out a man wearing a hat who lingered suspiciously around the entrance. Another focused on a woman who seemed to leave hurriedly. But nothing solid ever came from these armchair investigations, just theories built on theories. The internet also became a place where psychics, self-proclaimed mediums, and dream interpreters flooded in. Some claimed Brian was buried in concrete needles, or the bar. Others said he was living in Canada under a new identity. One dream post described him trapped in a basement, held by someone who once knew him. It's important to note, none of these ever resulted in verifiable leads. But not all online activity has been fantastical. In fact, some contributions have been genuinely useful. Several people began compiling a digital timeline of Brian's last movements, using police statements, bar layouts, and Google Maps to reconstruct what was and wasn't possible that night. These reconstructions helped debunk the theory that Brian might have slipped past security through the bar's construction zone. Too narrow, too risky, and likely under observation. Perhaps one of the eeriest aspects of the internet's obsession is how Brian's face has become digital folklore. His missing person posters, smiling at the camera, eyes full of life, now appear next to YouTube thumbnails, TikTok videos, and podcasts. He's been recreated in digital for all the theories, footage, and wild internet speculation. It's easy to forget that this mystery is rooted in very real heartbreak. Brian Shaffer wasn't just a face on a poster or the subject of Reddit threads. He was a son, a brother, a friend, and a man on the verge of a new chapter in life. The people who loved him were never interested in viral theories. They just wanted him home. Brian's family was shattered by his disappearance, and the pain started almost immediately. Just weeks after he went missing, his mother Renee, who had been battling a terminal illness, passed away. She never got the chance to see her son again. Her obituary held a hopeful note, a simple sentence stating that she was survived by her sons, Derek and Brian. Despite Brian already being listed as missing, it was her quiet, motherly way of insisting he was still alive. His younger brother Derek became one of the most vocal advocates for keeping the case alive. He attended media interviews, coordinated with police, and kept Brian's name circulating in the news. But in time, Derek's optimism began to crack under the weight of the silence. In multiple interviews, he confessed that the not knowing was worse than any answer. "If someone killed him, just say it," he once told a local reporter. "If he's alive and doesn't want to come back, just let us know. This limbo is the worst part." Even Brian's girlfriend, Alexis, who had hoped to be engaged to him soon, held on to hope long after the search went cold. She called his phone repeatedly in the days and weeks after his disappearance. Most of the time it went straight to voicemail. But then something strange happened in September 2006, 5 months after he vanished. For a brief moment, the phone rang. Alexis felt her heart stop. She hoped it was a sign that Brian was alive. She called again and again, but it never rang again after that. Phone records later confirmed that the ring had indeed occurred. What's more, cell tower data showed the call pinged a tower in Hilliard, Ohio, just 14 miles from Columbus. It was a bizarre moment, filled with hope and fear. Did someone have his phone? Had Brian been alive all that time? The trail went cold once again. The phone was never located. Over the years, the family marked birthdays, anniversaries, and what should have been his graduation with small, painful remembrances. There was never a body to bury, never a final goodbye, only a void that stretched through time. What haunts many about this case is how close everything felt. Brian didn't vanish from a forest or a desert, or some remote village. He vanished in the middle of a city, surrounded by friends, just feet from a security camera. And yet, despite that proximity, he might as well have disappeared into thin air. The Columbus Police Department kept Brian's case open. But if you're still watching, you've walked every step of this haunting mystery with us. And now we reach the edge of what we know. Brian Shaffer's disappearance is one of those stories that refuses to let go. It clings to the mind because it breaks all the rules. People don't just vanish in public, in places lined with cameras while surrounded by friends. And yet, Brian did. Or at least, someone made sure it looked that way. We've explored the night he vanished. The bar that was supposed to be a place of fun, the security footage that left more questions than answers, and the people who either know something or carry their own mysteries. We've followed the theories, from the rational to the outlandish. We've looked into the digital ghosts, the ringing phone, the untouched bank accounts, the eerie silence that followed. But for all the hours of footage, the witness interviews, the desperate searches through dumpsters, rivers, and city blocks, no definitive answer has ever come forward. And that's what makes this case so enduring. It's not just the disappearance itself. It's the sheer lack of evidence. No signs of a struggle. No financial trail. No physical remains. No confirmed sightings. Just absence. One moment Brian was laughing with friends, stepping into a camera's view. And the next, nothing. He wasn't seen walking out. He wasn't seen inside. It was as if the building swallowed him whole. Over the years, the case has become something larger than one man. It's a symbol of how fragile reality can be. How, in a moment, a normal life, a rising med student with dreams, love, and future plans, can be erased from the world's view without warning or explanation. It's a cautionary tale, It's a ghost story, and it's a wound that still bleeds for the people who loved him. In the end, maybe what haunts us most is not just the possibility that Brian was taken or the why that he ran away, but the idea that we might never know. That even with all our technology, our media, our global sharing of information,